So this is the book from which we drew the title of our podcast.
Indeed. This is where Winnow gets its name.
Yes, the winnowing fan that is a part of Tiresias's prophecy that you wrote your senior thesis in college all about.
Indeed. I wrote a long paper trying to make sense of Tiresias's prophecy, and we shall not speak of it anymore.
Well, we'll talk about the prophecy, but we won't talk about your paper if you don't want to.
I honestly don't remember very much of it.
It's blacked out.
Yeah.
And we're wearing black because Odysseus is going to talk to a lot of dead people. Hello, and welcome to Winnow, a couple's close reading of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'm Owen Gemmer.
I'm Isabella Gemmer. We are married, and we love to talk about books together.
In this podcast, we are working our way book by book through the entirety of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. This particular episode will cover the Odyssey Book 11.
As we've said, there are many dead people, and more dead women than men.
Yeah.
Which is something I hope to talk about.
Yes.
But I am not in charge of the opening question.
No, you are in charge of the summary.
I am in charge of the summary.
I am...
Honestly, kind of an easy gig this time.
Well, it depends on how much detail you're going to go into, so...
Not very much.
Oh, okay. Ready? Begin.
So Odysseus and his men reach the edge of the world and also the underworld. It is very dark, apparently. That's the only description we get. He does the sacrifices. He makes a pool of blood, and then the shades approach. The first person he talks to is Elpenor, who we remember from last book was the youngest guy in his group who fell off the roof, broke his neck. He asks that Odysseus when they return to the land of living, bury him. And then they speak to Tiresias. Tiresias, the blind prophet, tells Odysseus all the steps they'll need to take, and they'll maybe get home. It's a very strange prophecy. He also tells Odysseus to do stuff after he gets home. We'll talk about that also. And then he speaks to a variety of people. He speaks to first a bunch of women, his mother, and then he speaks to some old buddies from the Iliad. We get Agamemnon, and we get the other guy.
Achilles.
And then they go back.
Well, you have actually anticipated my opening question. We did not talk about this before. But yeah, I was also struck. I remember from this book the conversation with Tiresias and with Achilles and with Agamemnon and all that. But I had forgotten also about the sort of long section in the middle where he talks to and sort of just watches a bunch of women sort of shades come through. And so my overall question is, what does Odysseus learn from the sort of two batches of people he interacts with, the women and then the sort of men at the end? Like, how are these two groups contrasting one another? And what does Odysseus, seem to be gaining from all of these interactions?
Yeah. To attack this question, I feel like I want to jump to Agamemnon and Achilles first.
Which happens at the very end, but yeah, that's fine.
It does happen. That is like the end part, but it feels easier to do first and then to go back and then talk about the things that the women say. Because something that stood out a lot to me, so just do Agamemnon first.
Okay, yeah.
Agamemnon tells Odysseus doesn't know the whole kerfuffle that went down when he got back home.
Which we, the readers, know because Telemachus mentioned it, Menelaus mentioned it, like everybody's mentioned it many, many times.
It's the talk of the town.
Yeah.
And Odysseus is, he's not the last to find out because of the way that this is set back in time.
Right.
But this is the first time he hears, but he gets to hear it from Agamemnon, right? Everyone else gets to hear this information very second, third, fourth hand, potentially. Odysseus gets to hear it from the Trojan horse's mouth, if you will. No, he's not Trojan. From Agamemnon's mouth. And so, Agamemnon, the thing that struck me most was Agamemnon gives him like explicit advice of what to do when he hopefully returns to Ithaca. One of those things is like two pieces of advice. One of them is when he gets back to Ithaca, not to like park his boat out front. It's to be sneaky and like and to enter quietly, like through the back door into Ithaca. And then the other piece of advice he gives is about what Agamemnon has learned about women.
Yeah.
Agamemnon says, "So you must never treat your wife too well. Do not let her know everything you know. Tell her some things, hide others." And then he goes on to say, "But your wife will not kill you, Odysseus. The wise Penelope is much too sensible to do such things."
Yeah. He falls into the exact same trap that he's trying to warn against of like just blindly trusting.
Yeah.
Which I think is funny. Yeah. Because he thought the same about his wife when he went back. Like, oh, she would never kill me.
Yeah, she would never do that to me. And then
Yeah.
she did.
Yeah. I do find, the story from him, like even more, well, maybe truthful, but like intense and in a way that feels exaggerated because he's bitter not just about how Clytemnestra, his wife, and Aegisthus plotted to kill him, but also basically like all of his companions who came with him. And he even says to Odysseus, like, you've seen a lot of death, but you have not seen this kind of death. And he's like telling Odysseus that like, yeah, actually what I experienced is like way worse than anything you've ever experienced. Which I think is just kind of funny and braggadocious of Agamemnon.
But I mean, it is one thing to encounter slaughter on the battlefield, but another to encounter it within like at a banquet hall within your own home.
Yes.
Like I think of classic, like the Red Wedding.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's why it's so shocking.
Right.
It's not an open battlefield, but they make it one. Or the people who do the ambush in that episode.
Yeah. And also, again, like so much of this is directly foreshadowing what will happen to Odysseus when he gets home, but in different ways, right? Like there will be threats and there will be a bloodbath within the house, but it will come from different sources and for different reasons. And I do find it, it's just good storytelling to plant your seeds that like something might go wrong when he gets home and that be right, but not all the way.
Yeah, yeah. Though we do know, we don't have to jump to Tiresias' prophecy really just yet, but he does prophesize that if Odysseus manages to make it to Ithaca, he will match the suitors' violence and kill them all.
Yes.
So Odysseus kind of knows if he makes it back home, he will overcome the challenges that have been set there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, let's bar the prophecy talk.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot going on with like, if you know you could succeed at something, how much more brash does that make you to try it? But we can talk about that later because Agamemnon. I will say also, it's interesting that Agamemnon's advice is to not to tell Penelope all of his stories when he returns home, like to hold some of him back, I guess. And well, we'll get there when we get there, but it's implied that like once Odysseus and Penelope do reunite, Odysseus seems to tell her everything. But yeah, it's not like immediate. In the same way that when he is with the Phaeacians, he doesn't like drop all of his mics at the same time.
Yeah. The other thing I just realized, this is also strange advice coming from Agamemnon because following this advice wouldn't have helped Agamemnon. Like Agamemnon's problem wasn't that he told Clytemnestra too much. Like Clytemnestra's beef with him was that like 10 years ago, before they were even at Troy, Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter to the gods for favorable winds. Yeah. She's been stewing on this for 10 years and planning it. Like this wasn't like I said the wrong thing to Clytemnestra, oopsie, and then she killed me. It's like nothing Agamemnon could have done in that moment would have saved him. And so, yeah, it's just this interesting, like, he didn't really even learn the right lessons from what happened to him. But he's like, oh, Odysseus, I know exactly how to help you.
Yeah. And then the first bit of advice, right? You must never treat your wife too well. Like, once again, Agamemnon has learned no lessons.
Right.
Like, that's like so missing the point.
Yeah. No, maybe the lesson is like, don't kill your daughter. Like,
he's not seeing like the real issues at hand.
Yeah.
Right. So then there is Achilles. And Achilles, to sum up what he says, Odysseus basically is like, wow, it must be so great to be dead after being the greatest warrior who ever lived. implying that even in the afterlife, he's like, you are king here, right? Like, obviously, he's not king of the underworld, but he's king of the dead. Like,
everybody knows you, and everybody's like, wow, Achilles, you're awesome. Yeah.
and basically, Achilles' response to that is, I would prefer to be a workman hired by a poor man on a peasant farm than rule as king of all the dead. And then he goes on and asks, he wants to know about Neoptolemus, his son, and how well his son did in battle and those kinds of things. But
I love this scene because I think it's a direct sort of commentary on the Iliad, where Achilles sort of had this decision to make based on his fate of like, I could leave the war right now. I could go home and I could live a long life, but I would never be famous. Or I could fight and die and be super famous. And in the moment, he chooses to fight and die and be super famous. But now in death, he's just like, I just straight up made the wrong decision and I regret that with my whole being. I would rather just be a nobody farmer still alive right now. And yeah, I just think it puts a really, I think, wonderful sort of bow on Achilles' sort of growth or character arc throughout the Iliad. Because as we mentioned at the end of the Iliad, right, like it ends in a strange place where Achilles is not dead, but we kind of, through the other mythology, know he's going to die. But like none of those stories are really existent anymore about Achilles' actual death. And so to have him come back now, I think, it does a really great job of sort of tying his whole character arc from the Iliad onward together.
it also serves to, I think here we get a full picture of kind of the Achilles Odysseus dichotomy.
Yeah.
Because we also learn from Tiresias' prophecy that if Odysseus makes it home to Ithaca, et cetera, he will live into his old age and die an old man. And so I see what Achilles says here as almost an admission of, I would rather have been you, Odysseus.
But it also, I think, is important that Odysseus will kind of get both. Like Achilles had to choose between long life or fame, but in Tiresias's version, he kind of will get both. He will get long life and will get fame.
The thing that also sets Achilles and Odysseus apart for me is this idea that Odysseus is like ever suffering.
Long suffering.
Is long suffering and the quote unquote unluckiest man alive. Versus Achilles is like the most favored by destiny, or the luckiest man alive, and these kinds of things.
What a wonderful segue into Greek time.
Yeah.
So we want to look at two different descriptions of Achilles and Odysseus that set up this contrast. Because, I think it's very intentional the way that obviously the Iliad focuses on Achilles and now the Odyssey focuses on Odysseus, to really compare them as sort of like heroes, protagonists, whatever, literary term we want to use. So do we want to start with Achilles or start with Odysseus? And then
I think let's start with Achilles because we're right here.
Sure.
So the line in question, around line 480 in the Greek, in the Lattimore translation, Achilles, no man before has ever been more blessed than you, nor ever will be.
Yeah. So this term that Lattimore does as more blessed is makar tatos. The tatos ending is the superlative form of an adjective, so the most, and then the adjective base form is makar, which means it gets translated as both blessed and happy. But we wanted to talk about this because ideas of blessedness and happiness in sort of like Greek thought are, again, one of these things that have sort of shifted and changed. So when it is being used kind of in Homer's time, let me look it up in the Cunliffe dictionary. So Cunliffe, in his lexicon of the Homeric dialect, defines makar as having great resources, great, powerful, influential, wealthy. Then the second definition is happy, fortunate. And then as an epithet of the gods, happy, blessed, living in ease, dwelling in serene. So it's often used in kind of divine senses that you are, like blessed by the gods. And so we, I think, in the modern day, think about like happiness as like, I'm smiley and I'm, all of these things. But that sort of idea of happiness is more similar to the Greek concept that Aristotle really popularizes of eudaimonia, which is like having a good demon, literally. But that is the more kind of like positive, like contentedness that we associate with happiness now.
Yeah. It's So not rainbows, butterflies, smiles.
Right.
Yeah.
But like gifts and
Yeah.
blessings.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of like almost like being full of kleos or being like rewarded with lots of kleos.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to also transport through other sort of eras of Greek thought, this makar is the root word that is used also in the Beatitudes in the New Testament. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall see God. All of the Beatitudes, it is not happy, it is blessed. And it is this makarios, I think is the form it appears in the Beatitudes. Because again, I think, again, if we're thinking about Christian thought, that like if you follow all of Jesus's commandments, like you will actually probably not be like a happy person. Like it's not going to make your life super easy and you're like, woohoo, I'm having fun all the time. Like that's not the goal of Christian life. But blessedness is the result of that is separate from happiness. And in the same way, I think we see Achilles here, right? Like Achilles was not a happy person. Like the entirety of the Iliad, he's grumpy, he's sad, he's kind of despondent. Yet he is objectively blessed because he is like the most skilled warrior that like Greece has ever seen. And obviously, right, like this moment, this label is coming from Odysseus in the moment, and it's kind of what Achilles rejects in what we've already talked about, where like Odysseus is like, wow, you're the most blessed of all of us. Like you're so famous and well known. And Achilles is like, that's not what I want. Like, I just want to be happy. Like he's just kind of like, I just want to live, and chill in a vineyard and live a long life. Yeah. And so to complete the sort of Greek time contrast, right, the term that gets used for Odysseus, both in this book here, book 11, and then constantly throughout the Odyssey, like 6 or 7 different times, is kamore, which is from the root word kamoros, which kam is a form of the prefix kata, which is like according to, and then moros is the word for sort of fate and destiny. So it is sort of subject to destiny or like according to destiny. And so Odysseus is described as sort of he who is the most subject to destiny, which then sort of gets shortened and condensed into like ill-fated or something like that. Yeah. The first time here in book 11 where this comes up is Odysseus's mom who's talking to him, who's like, wait, why are you down in the land of the dead? Like what's brought you here?
Which we can move to that now if you want to. But yeah, so Odysseus' mother says to him, "Oh, my child, ill-fated beyond all other mortals." And that ill-fated is that kamoros, subject to destiny.
Right. And so we get this contrast of Odysseus as sort of ill-fated and yet promised a very long life versus Achilles, who is sort of like blessed, but isn't very happy with how everything turned out.
Yeah.
And so, I really pity Achilles in this interaction because he has to sort of live with this decision and this idea that like everybody else thinks he's great, but he himself doesn't.
That's kind of a curse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the prophecy from Tiresias because it is, I think, worded very strangely where the vast majority of the prophecy, like the first part is structured, like you will get to the Thrinacian Islands, there will be cattle there, and if you don't touch the cattle, you will sail home and everything will be great. But if you do touch the cattle, then we get this really long prophecy. And so all of it is actually conditional. Like it's not actually a prophecy of this will happen, but it is a conditional. Like if you do this, then all of this will happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting framing of the prophecy where it's not actually said this will definitely happen, but it's more this will be the result of this particular decision that you will have to make.
So Tiresias speaking to Odysseus. But even so, and still you might come back after much suffering, if you can contain your own desire and contain your companions. At that time, when you first put in your well-made vessel at the island Thrinacia, escaping the sea's blue water, and there discover pasturing the cattle of fat sheep of Helios, who sees all things and listens to all things. Then, if you keep your mind on homecoming and leave these unharmed, you might all make your way to Ithaca after much suffering. But if you do harm them...
Let's just pause there, right? Because that's the first part. It's just like 3 or 4 lines. That's just like, if you get to Thrinacia and you keep your mind on homecoming and don't kill any of the cattle, boom, all good. Like you'll have to still work to get there, but like you'll all get home and everything will be fine.
Mm-hmm. But if you do harm them, then I testify to the destruction of your ship and your companions. But if you yourself get clear, you will come home in bad case with the loss of all your companions in someone else's ship and find troubles in your household, insolent men who are eating away your livelihood and courting your godlike wife, and offering gifts to win her. And then goes on to keep describing the events.
Yeah, so let's pause here too, because I think there's another really interesting narrative aspect to this, right? Obviously, any prophecy in any story, not just in Greek mythology, is like, oh, this is probably going to happen. But it's even more extreme here. Again, not just because like we have read this before and the story is very popular, but even in the very first 10 lines of the poem where Homer is making his invocation to the muse, he says, can you just read it?
The pains he suffered in his spirit on the wide sea, struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. Even so, he could not save his companions, hard though he strove to. They were destroyed by their own wild recklessness, fools who devoured the oxen of Helios, the sun god.
Right, so right there.
Yeah, we know.
In like line 9, Homer tells us that the companions are going to devour these cattle, and they will not make it home, and Odysseus will make it home alone.
Yeah, because it's mentioned like as such a plot point in the first 10 lines, and then in the prophecy it's like such a big deal. It feels like, because we've had moments before when Odysseus has wanted to do something or his men have wanted to do an opposite thing, and there's like a struggle between the two, but the cattle of Helios is being painted as the most pivotal point between Odysseus versus his men.
Yeah. And so I think it's important to remember, though, that in narrative, Odysseus doesn't have all the knowledge that we as readers have. And so he is going into this interaction now hoping he will be able to prevent the crew from eating the cattle. But there's, again, this like dramatic irony, right? That I think Shakespeare kind of is most well known for dramatic irony. But this is an earlier example of it, of we, the readers, know already, even if you haven't read the Odyssey before or know any of the stories, simply if this is your first time picking up this book and you have only read the text in this book, you know what will happen. And thus you can sort of like go into the story that will come of the Odysseus and his crew on the island and sort of know, the drama of what will happen.
Yeah. It reminds me of the first lines of Romeo and Juliet, where Shakespeare just tells you what's going to happen. Yeah. And then you're like, all right, I guess that's what's about to happen.
Yeah.
And that like, you know what? It also to have a really modern example reminds me of White Lotus, how each season of the White Lotus starts really briefly with that, like, with that feeling of, oh, someone's going to die.
Right.
Right. At least for the third season, it was someone's going to shoot a gun. Right. So it wasn't, no, there was a dead body floating in the water, I think. I can't remember. But yeah, so White Lotus always starts with that same thing of, it's very short and it's very, someone's going to die.
Right.
And then you get to watch that unfold and you get to feel the tension. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. I'm a sucker for that. Again, like Othello is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays because Iago is like such a good narrator of his plans. And it's like so enticing to see Iago give a soliloquy where he's like, here's what I'm about to do. And then like watch him do it. And yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. I guess it's like a good reminder. So like when you think about the Greeks of the time listening to this, they felt like they were watching the White Lotus is what I'm trying to tell you. Like they were like so into it. Shall we talk about the rest of the prophecy or?
No? Let's keep going with the prophecy and then we'll get to the women because, so the prophecy includes you will get home alone. the suitors will be there trying to, sleep with your wife, but you will match them with violence and you will kill them all. And so he kind of, gives Odysseus permission and almost this like prophecy where like, if you find yourself in this situation, you will prevail.
Yeah, if you find yourself in a situation where you've made it home, you're all alone without your men, then don't worry. You'll get through the last bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Which in itself is interesting because, I mean, again, this is a little bit spoilers if you haven't read it, but like this is what happens. But also it continues from there.
Yeah.
There's more that will happen then after technically where like the events of the Odyssey end.
Yes. So yeah, Tiresias tells Odysseus after he kills the suitors, either by treachery or openly with the sharp bronze, then you must take up your well-shaped oar and go on another journey until you come where there are men living who know nothing of the sea, and who eat food that is not mixed with salt, who never have known ships whose cheeks are painted purple, who never have known well-shaped oars, which act for ships as wings do. And I will tell you very clear proof, and you cannot miss it. When, as you walk, some other wayfarer happens to meet you and says you carry a winnow fan on your bright shoulder, then you must plant your well-shaped oar in the ground and render ceremonious sacrifice to the Lord Poseidon. Instructions about sacrifices. Death will come to you from the sea in some altogether unwarlike way, and it will end you in the ebbing time of sleek old age. Your people about you will be prosperous. All this is true that I tell you.
Yes. So we get the winnowing fan that, for more reasons than just this, inspired the name of our podcast, where Odysseus will have an oar with him, but travel basically as inland as far as possible until you meet people who like don't know what an oar is and they think it's a winnowing fan, which again, I've never worked on a wheat farm, much less one that uses, centuries old, millennia old technology.
Yeah,
but my
old stuff.
understanding was that when you separate wheat, the like kernels from the chaff, you can use like a fan that looks kind of like an oar. It's like a stick with a big, flayed out thing to like create wind and then blow apart the chaff from the sort of like the good stuff.
Well, it's like it was like a basket on the end of a stick.
Yeah.
And you would put the unseparated grains like in the basket.
And like shake it around a bunch.
By shaking it and tossing it a bunch, it would separate the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can see how if you had never seen an oar, you might look at an oar and be like, is that what that is? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, this is the topic upon which I wrote my senior paper at St. John's College. And I should go reread it.
You also wrote it like during COVID.
Yeah. Well, no, I wrote it right before COVID.
That's right.
And
you had your oral exam on it during COVID via Microsoft Teams.
Yeah. So it was a strange time for all of us. Yes. But yeah, it's such a strange, unusual part of the book to me, which is why it intrigues me so much. And it is also in contrast, or it's not in contrast, it pairs nicely with at the very, like just a page before, when Elpenor, the guy who just died, fell from Circe's roof, he tells Odysseus to go back, when they go back from the underworld, find his body and bury him so that, he's honored and everything. And then to take an oar and to plant it in the mound over his grave. And
not just any oar, like take the oar that I used on the ship, like from my sort of station on the ship or wherever. He's like, take my oar and plant it there.
And yeah, and so this pairs nicely with this vision of Odysseus traveling after the events of the Odyssey. He's supposed to travel inland and then plant an oar in a similar fashion in the earth and then render sacrifices to Poseidon.
So yeah, there's this clear sort of idea of this as a sign of memorial, of kind of like an ending to the journeys and like a kind of recognition of all who have died along the way. Is that, am I remembering? I think you talked about that in your paper.
Well, I talked about that. I talked about like many other instances of planting, that kind of symbol could stand for, because I think it can be linked thematically to the tree that is at the center of Odysseus and Penelope's like bedroom quarters. This image of like an upright thing that's like planted in the earth.
That's steady and stable.
Yeah, that has this like steady and stable kind of foundation to it. That's kind of what I talked about.
And I think, didn't you also, I remember you had a section about the Cyclops and their contrast with the Phaeacians as like planters and not, where the Cyclopses, as we talked about a couple books ago, like they were not farmers or, you know, students of agriculture. They had like their island was very fertile, but they didn't plant anything. Whereas the Phaeacians were very sort of farming oriented. So we've already seen that contrast of like civilization being sort of defined by those who plant and sort of savages being defined by those who sort of just like let nature grow wild.
Yeah, that contrast and how Odysseus is supposed to take the oar, which would mean nothing to some people who live inland. It means nothing to them. They don't see it as an oar. They see it as a symbol of agriculture. But that recognition of agriculture is in a weird way, it's the opposite of the Cyclopses. And therefore represents like a different type of civilization or steadiness. And that this contrast also where he's been traveling along, he's been on the ocean this whole time, and now like the supposed final leg of the journey is over land. And like it's so weird to even picture Odysseus traveling over land.
Yeah.
You know, because he spends this whole book on the ocean.
Yeah. And I think also for us as modern readers, like in a globalized world, it's also hard to imagine there being people who have like never even heard of a boat because they've just lived inland. Like, right, even now, like obviously there are people who live inland and might never have seen the ocean, but like people know what the ocean is. But like this idea that like, no, there actually probably are plenty of people who live inland who have never seen the ocean and don't even know, you know, what a boat is.
Yeah.
And
I was thinking about that also, something similar with this concept of the underworld, because how they get there is very briefly described, but it's so funny to me because they basically just sail. They sail farther than anyone has ever sailed before. That's kind of like, and that's how they get there.
Yeah.
Like, I find it so interesting because the world was not complete in their view. Like, they did not in any way, they didn't conceive of the globe or like a finite scape, right? Like that the earth is a finite thing. There was so much that was unexplored for them on the fringes of what they knew that they would just say like, oh, beyond what we know, obviously that's where the underworld is. Like, I love that kind of stuff. I love like go to the edge of the world and find the underworld. And especially like in the third Pirates of the Caribbean movie, when it's like, obviously we can go to the underworld. We just sail really far away. I love that stuff.
Or in Percy Jackson, when it's go to Los Angeles. But just to briefly, since we're here, I will say I am very excited to see how Christopher Nolan renders this scene in the Odyssey, because we've gotten hints of it in the trailer. And I feel like because it is kind of very vague how it all happens. Yeah. I'm very, intrigued to see the visuals that Christopher Nolan will apply.
Yeah. How through either probably practical effects, how he like does this, whatever this transition will be really interesting. And also I was thinking about this again. I'm interested to see how much like justification he gives for each step along the way of Odysseus's journey, because like we talked about last episode, there isn't a terrible justification for going to the underworld other than Circe tells them to go. Yeah. Like a lot of the things Odysseus does is out of this, like, well, someone told me to do it. You know?
And I think the other thing I'm very curious about is how gory they'll make it, because when you actually think about the practical things that are noted, Odysseus like digs a trench, like a square trench around himself. He sacrifices animals, lets them bleed out into this trench, and then all the ghosts arise. And in order for the ghosts to talk to him, they have to drink the animal's blood from this trench.
Yeah.
And like every time he talks to somebody new, like the narration is like, you know, Achilles bent down and sort of like drank the blood and then was able to sort of recognize Odysseus. And
Yeah, no, the blood is so cool. Drinking the blood is so cool because it does two things. It allows, it's kind of implied that the shades around Odysseus don't really know who they are, which would make sense because they would have traveled through the river Lethe, and they would have forgotten themselves. That's what the river does. And so they have to drink the blood to like remember themselves. They have to, and then also so they can recognize Odysseus. And then the blood also makes sure that they only speak the truth. So it's got like all these different, it has all these different purposes. And it like in these interactions, Tiresias is able to talk to Odysseus without drinking the blood because he's special, I think, in the underworld. Just like, I don't know, he's special. So he can talk to Odysseus and he knows who he is. But by drinking the blood, he ensures that he is telling Odysseus the truth.
The phrase that Pope uses every time this happens is, he quaffed the gore.
Nice.
It's awesome. So
okay,
let's talk about then the women.
Yes.
Because that's the sort of big section that we have kind of, you know, danced around.
Yes.
The first conversation is with his mother.
Yes.
And I will admit, I was a little bit disappointed in it because it kind of is just an exchange of practical information where Odysseus is like, oh, you're dead. I'm sad you're dead. How'd you die? How's my dad doing? How's Penelope doing? And, you know.
Yeah. But also, Odysseus doesn't know those things.
Right. Yeah, so it just kind of becomes an info dump a little bit, where Odysseus is able to find out what is going on back home, or at least what was going on back home when his mother died.
It is kind of important.
Yeah, it's important, but it's not as like, there's not as much like emotional sort of, or even advice giving, where I guess I feel like the conversation between Agamemnon and Odysseus and between Achilles and Odysseus was more kind of like intimate than it was with his mother, whereas like with his mom, it's just kind of, it feels a little bit dry, just like exchanging information. Whereas like with Agamemnon and Achilles, it feels very sort of passionate and like, whoa, like we need to sort of like learn from each other and praise each other.
Yeah, though like it is really sad when Odysseus is kind of like, how did you die? And she's like, I just missed you so much. Like, she's kind of like, no one killed me. I didn't get sick. She like just kind of says she died of a broken heart, which is pretty sad, even though it's brief. There's that interaction. And then all the other women. And it's, so in the descriptions of all these women, they're not just like random women.
Right.
They are kind of like great figures of mythology. Lattimore says the wives and daughters of princes, right? So they are the wives and daughters of important men. And then whenever like one of them is introduced, it's also made clear like who they gave birth to.
Right.
Like whose mother they are as well. They're really important in terms of like who they're related to. And who they're related to is also usually like, they're all the great warriors that were either before the time of the Trojan War, during these kinds of things. Even one woman, I think, is the mother of Nestor, right? So like she would have been way before their time.
Old man Nestor.
Yeah. And yeah, so my thinking with all the conversations with the women.
I don't think he talks with any of them. He talks with his mom, and then I'm pretty sure it's just a kind of like parade.
They all go towards the blood. Odysseus takes out his sword so that they don't all drink it at once. I would not let them all drink the dark blood at the same time. So they waited and came to me in order, and each one told me about her origin, and I questioned all of them.
Okay.
So he doesn't give a word-for-word description of every exchange that they have, but he does. Yeah.
Right. The narration doesn't give us the conversation. There's not dialogue in the story, but yeah, okay. That's right.
So what I would say about all these conversations with the women is just that like it probably reminds him of Penelope, and that's like the obvious thing. And it's in contrast to Agamemnon, right? Like Agamemnon, who was like, oh, let me tell you about women. But that's after Odysseus has had these conversations with all these other women who are all like these very honorable, I don't know, like they seem to be, at least for the understanding of the time, I think they would have been considered like these, like they're exemplary of femininity of the time.
Yeah, they're
like,
matriarchs, and they have sort of like raised wonderful children who have gone on to do great things, and they have made a name for themselves through the way that they led their families and created their families and all of that. Yeah. No, it's very positive. Like all of the language describing these women and their legacies is overwhelmingly positive. And I think that's in contrast, not just to Achilles and Agamemnon, but even after he talks with them, he sees a bunch of other people being tortured in the underworld. He sees Tantalus, he sees Sisyphus, he sees all these other people. And so like basically all the men he sees are suffering.
He sees he describes all these men who are suffering the classic, having their livers eaten, etc.
Right.
But then like all of the women that they're just like, they're just floating around, just content with their lives that they led, totally unbothered.
Right.
Yeah. And it's quite nice.
Right. Yeah. So I think it sets up like this contrast between sort of like what is a hero kind of where like all of the people that Odysseus thinks of as heroes, the men who have sort of gone out and done stuff, like they all are very unhappy in death. Whereas all the women who he might have initially thought of as just like, well, they just, stayed home and, they give birth and that's all they're good for. But like, no, they're the ones who actually seem like proud and content and, really happy with their lives in death.
Yeah. I don't know if Odysseus like maybe thought that before, but that's definitely like the lesson I think he learns in the underworld is that he sees who's content and who's not, basically.
Right. Yeah. And this idea that like constantly just going out and trying to like conquer and make a name for yourself, like often doesn't end well. Yeah. And that the sort of like unassuming familial life is actually preferable, which kind of, again, further proves Achilles right, that like Achilles' regret that I chose sort of fame and short-term sort of success over a sort of long and unassuming life. Yeah.
Yeah. And Achilles' focus on wanting to know how his son is and these things goes along with this idea, I think, that he would have rather have been around for his son, kind of.
Yeah, because that's another, and speaking of the sons, right, another of Agamemnon's regrets that he talks about is that he didn't get, like, he tells Odysseus, we both left young children when we went to Troy. Odysseus left Telemachus, he left Orestes, and he basically says, like, I never got to see how much my son had grown up before I was killed. And he even asks, like, do you know where my son is? And Odysseus, like, I haven't been home yet. Like, I don't know anything. Like, well, but like, that's a big regret for Agamemnon, is that he never got to sort of see the growth and development of his son. And obviously we know Telemachus is sort of on his own sort of journey to manhood already. And that will continue when Odysseus is reunited with him on Ithaca. And so there's also this, father-son sort of dynamic going on, and mother-son, obviously, through all the mothers that he talks to.
Yeah.
We know now that Odysseus has two paths forward that will hinge upon these cattle on Thrinacia. He knows this, and he knows the stakes that are about to come in the next part of his journey, which we will see in Book 12.
Yep.
Book 12. I have an audiobook of Samuel Butler's translation ready if you would like to listen ahead to Book 12 in preparation for our episode next week, or you can read in your own version or just listen in, and we'll summarize and go from there.
Yep. We also have a bonus mini podcast over on Patreon. At the time of this episode's release, we will have an episode of that podcast where we usually talk about all the other books that we read, and we will also talk about books, but we will also be talking about Project Hail Mary. Right,
which I think, just to go ahead and spoil a little bit, will be in contention for best movie of the year, no matter how good the Odyssey is. Like, the Odyssey could be the perfect movie, and I think Project Hail Mary will still be able to vie with it for best movie of the year come the end of 2026.
We try to keep Winnow a little bit more focused on like classics, old stuff, and we keep our Patreon-only podcast chonkers. We talk more about the modern things we read, and maybe occasionally we'll talk about modern book-to-movie adaptations over there. But things like Wuthering Heights, even though they seem modern, we keep that
That's a
on
classic.
Winnow.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, even if you don't join us on Patreon, give us a like and a subscribe. It helps us reach new people and hopefully, again, get people prepared for Nolan's movie this summer.
Yes.
We're almost halfway through the Odyssey, and we are getting more and more excited every day.
Yes, summer is fast approaching, and I am very excited for it.
Yes.
But until next time,
Happy reading.